Fort Bragg, North Carolina, August 1968. The training ground sits at the edge of the main compound, a wide rectangle of packed earth surrounded by low barracks buildings that have been standing since the 1940s and that carry in their weathered surfaces the particular institutional permanence of structures, built not for beauty, but for endurance. In August, the Carolina heat settles over everything like a physical weight. The air smells of red clay and cut grass, and the particular combination of exertion and machinery that military training grounds always smell of. It is a Saturday morning. The official training schedule is light. 600 soldiers, a mixture of active-duty Green Berets, support staff, and personnel from 2 adjacent units who have been drawn by word of mouth, have gathered in the open space between the barracks and the equipment depot. They are not here for official business. They are here because 3 days ago, a man named Sergeant First Class Daniel Marsh told anyone who would listen that he intended to prove something on Saturday morning, and word traveled the way. Word travels in military environments. Fast, complete, and impossible to ignore. Daniel Marsh is 34 years old. He stands 6 feet 4 inches tall. He weighs 300 pounds. He has been in the United States Army for 12 years, the last 6 of those in Special Forces, the unit that selects for the rarest combination of physical capability and psychological resilience, that produces in its members a category of human being that most civilians encounter only in films, and that even other military personnel regard with a specific earned deference. He has deployed 4 times. He has been in situations where his size and his training were the difference between his unit coming home and not coming home. He is not a man who makes idle claims about physical capability. The claim he has been making for 3 days is not idle. It began at dinner on Wednesday evening. A colleague described what he had seen at Long Beach 4 years earlier. A Chinese-American martial artist whose demonstrations had produced a specific kind of discussion in military circles. Is it real or is it performance? Marsh had an opinion. 143 pounds of kung fu against 300 pounds of special forces training was not a contest. It was arithmetic. By Thursday evening, he had said it in front of enough people that the challenge had taken on institutional momentum, a claim that required either demonstration or retraction. He chose demonstration. He put up $80,000 of his own money. The terms were simple. Survive 10 seconds. Take the money. He had posted the terms on the bulletin board outside the mess hall. By Saturday morning, no one had signed up. The training ground at 9 in the morning held 600 people and 0 volunteers. Bruce Lee arrived at Fort Bragg on Friday evening. He was not there for Daniel Marsh. He was there because a former student, a Green Beret officer named Captain Williams, who had trained with Bruce Lee in Los Angeles the previous year, had invited him to give a demonstration to a select group of Special Forces personnel who had been asking about Jeet Kune Do and its potential applications in close-quarters combat situations. It was the kind of invitation Bruce Lee accepted regularly, a chance to show serious people what the principles actually contained in an environment where the people watching had the professional background to evaluate what they were seeing. He had arrived quietly, as he always arrived everywhere. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 143 pounds. He was 30 years old. Captain Williams met him at the gate. Over dinner, Williams mentioned the bulletin board, the $80,000, the 600 soldiers, and the 0 volunteers. Bruce Lee asked one question. "What time is the demonstration tomorrow?" 9 in the morning, Williams said. Bruce Lee nodded. He finished his dinner. He went to bed. If you love Bruce Lee stories, like this video and subscribe. New stories every single day. The crowd of 600 had been assembled since 8:30. They had the particular restless energy of people who have gathered for something they expect to be one-sided and are not entirely comfortable with that expectation, not opposed to it exactly, but aware that watching a man issue a challenge that no one has accepted carries a quality of incompleteness that the morning's entertainment had not yet resolved. Marsh stood at the center of the training ground. He was wearing his physical training uniform, shorts, a gray Army t-shirt that fit him the way Army t-shirts fit men of his dimensions, which is to say that it performed the minimum function of covering the torso while making no effort to conceal what the torso contained. His arms, at rest, were approximately the circumference of a standard automobile tire. His neck had a width that most men's thighs did not approach. He stood with the particular stillness of someone who has been trained to occupy space efficiently and has developed over 12 years the specific physical grammar of a man who has never entered a situation in which his size was not the dominant variable. He was looking at the crowd. He was looking for someone who might be about to walk toward him. No one was. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice. It was not a loud voice. It did not have the quality of a challenge. No aggression, no performance, no attempt to establish itself against the ambient noise of 600 people in an outdoor space. It was simply a voice speaking at a volume sufficient to be heard by the people immediately nearby and, through the specific acoustic properties of the moment, a crowd that had gone slightly quieter in the absence of anything happening, carrying further than such a voice would normally carry. The voice said, "I'll take that bet." The crowd turned. In the back, perhaps 40 feet from where Marsh was standing, a man was making his way through the assembled soldiers toward the center of the training ground. He was small. This was the first thing that registered in the crowd, not who he was, not what he was about to do, but the simple, immediate fact of his size against the context of what he was walking toward. 5'7", perhaps 145 pounds. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a plain shirt. He moved through the crowd with a quality of unhurried attention that was, in retrospect, the first indication to anyone paying close enough attention that this was not a man who had miscalculated the situation he was entering. He was not miscalculating anything. He was Bruce Lee, and nobody in that crowd knew this. Not yet. Daniel Marsh looked at the man walking toward him across the packed earth of the Fort Bragg training ground. He looked at him for approximately 3 seconds. Then he said, in the direct, flat tone of someone stating a fact for the benefit of the assembled crowd, "Son, do you understand what you're walking into?" Bruce Lee stopped approximately 10 feet from Marsh. He looked up at him. He said, "I understand the terms. 10 seconds, $80,000. Marsh said, "I weigh 300 pounds. I've been doing this for 12 years. I'm trying to do you a favor by asking if you understand what you're walking into." Bruce Lee looked at him. He said, "I appreciate the consideration. I'm familiar with the terms." A sound moved through the 600 people watching. Not quite laughter, not quite concern, but something between the two. The sound of a crowd processing a development that had not been on the program and that was currently running several possible outcomes simultaneously, most of which ended the same way. Marsh looked at Bruce Lee for another moment. He said, "Your name?" Bruce Lee said, "Bruce Lee." The name meant nothing to Marsh. It meant something to Captain Williams, who was standing at the edge of the crowd and who had, at the moment Bruce Lee's voice came from the back of the assembled soldiers, closed his eyes briefly and opened them again with the expression of someone who has understood all at once what is about to happen. Williams did not intervene. Bruce Lee had made a choice with full knowledge and full capability. Interfering would have been a form of disrespect. He watched. 600 people watched. Marsh settled into the stance he always settled into before these exchanges, the wide, grounded base of someone who has spent 12 years learning to make himself immovable, who knows that his primary advantage is his weight and has trained every movement around making that weight available as a weapon. Bruce Lee stood with his weight slightly forward, his hands at his sides, the loose, apparently casual posture that anyone who had trained with him recognized, and that Marsh, seeing it for the first time, assessed as the posture of someone who did not know what they were doing. The 10-second clock had no official keeper. Everyone in the crowd was keeping it. The exchange lasted 4 seconds. If you love Bruce Lee stories, like this video and subscribe. New stories every single day. What happened in those 4 seconds has been described by the soldiers who were present in interviews given over subsequent decades, not in military publications, not in official records, but in the informal oral history of a unit that had been present for something unusual and had not forgotten it. The accounts agree on the shape of what happened. They disagree, as eyewitness accounts always disagree, on the specific mechanics, on which movement came first, on the precise sequence of contact, on the exact duration of each exchange within the 4 seconds. These are the disagreements of people who witnessed something at speed and whose individual vantage points produced individual versions of the same event. They agree on the result. Marsh came forward. He moved with the explosive, committed forward pressure of a man who has spent 12 years developing exactly this. The initial movement that, in his experience, resolved most physical confrontations before they became complicated, the forward mass applied with the specific intent of removing the question of what would happen by answering it immediately and definitively. Bruce Lee was not where that pressure was going. This is the phrase that appears in some variation in nearly every account of those 4 seconds. Not that Bruce Lee dodged or blocked or stepped away, but that the pressure arrived somewhere Bruce Lee was not. He had moved, not far, not dramatically, not in a way that looked like evasion from a distance, into the space that Marsh's forward commitment had created, the specific geometric gap that 300 pounds of committed forward motion produces in the half-second before that motion completes. His left hand made contact with Marsh's right wrist. A redirect. Not a grab, not a lock, the lightest possible suggestion of a different direction for an arm that was already in motion. Marsh's 300 pounds of forward momentum, redirected by 3 fingers' worth of contact at the exact point of maximum leverage, went somewhere it had not chosen to go. His balance broke, not to the ground. Marsh was too experienced, too physically capable for a single redirect to put him on the ground, but his balance broke in the specific, unmistakable way that a fighter's balance breaks when the geometry of their attack has been fundamentally altered, when the foundation they committed to is no longer the foundation they are standing on. He recovered. He turned. Bruce Lee was standing where he had been standing. The crowd was silent. 4 seconds. Marsh stood in the training ground and looked at the man who had just done something that he, 12 years of Special Forces training, 300 pounds of functional mass, 4 deployments, had never had done to him before. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Do it again." They went for 7 more minutes. This is the part of the story that the official challenge had not accounted for. The continuation beyond the terms, the 2 minutes that became 7, as Marsh, with the specific intellectual honesty of a genuinely serious man encountering something his framework had not prepared him for, kept asking for more. Not because he thought he was going to find the answer, because the asking was the right response to what he was experiencing, and he knew it. Bruce Lee showed him the same principle 7 more times in 7 different configurations, different entry angles, different techniques applied at different moments in Marsh's various attacks, always the same underlying structure. The redirect rather than the block, the use of committed mass as a resource rather than an obstacle, the movement to where the pressure was not, rather than the resistance against where the pressure was. 7 minutes. After the 7th minute, Marsh held up his hand. He looked at Bruce Lee. He said, "Who are you?" Captain Williams, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd with the specific expression of someone watching a prediction come true, answered before Bruce Lee could. He said, "His name is Bruce Lee. He developed a martial arts system called Jeet Kune Do. He was here to give a demonstration this afternoon." Marsh looked at Williams. He looked at Bruce Lee. He said, "This was the demonstration." Williams said, "I didn't know he was going to do this." Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that several witnesses described as the most surprising moment of the entire morning. More surprising than the 4-second exchange, more surprising than the 7 minutes that followed. He reached into the pocket of his physical training shorts. He took out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee looked at it. It was a check for $80,000. Bruce Lee said, "The terms were 10 seconds. This wasn't 10 seconds." Marsh said, "The terms were 10 seconds. You would have had it in 1. He held the check out. Bruce Lee said, "Keep it. What you just learned is worth more than $80,000. Use the money for something that matters." Marsh looked at him. He put the check back in his pocket. He extended his hand. Bruce Lee shook it. If you love Bruce Lee stories, like this video and subscribe. New stories every single day. The story of the Fort Bragg training ground spread through special forces the way significant stories spread through tight military communities, completely, accurately, and fast. Captain Williams gave a formal account to his commanding officer the following week. The commanding officer forwarded a summary to the Special Forces Training Directorate. The Directorate, operating with the practical intelligence that military organizations apply to useful information, added a module on alternative combat principles to the Advanced Special Operations Training Curriculum, a module that drew, without attribution but with unmistakable influence, on the specific principles that Bruce Lee had demonstrated on a Saturday morning in August of 1968. The module is still there. Daniel Marsh retired in 1976 as a master sergeant. People who served with him described a change that became visible in the months after Fort Bragg, a new emphasis on what he called economy, the minimum force required, applied at the maximum moment of leverage. He talked about that Saturday morning exactly once formally, in a training lecture he gave to junior NCOs in 1972. He said, "The largest man in a room is not automatically the most dangerous man in a room. I learned this the hard way, in the most useful way possible, from someone who demonstrated it to me directly without hurting me while surrounded by 600 witnesses." He paused. "That," he said, "is what mastery looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply does what needs to be done and lets the result speak." He never mentioned Bruce Lee by name in the lecture. He didn't need to. The 600 people who had been on the training ground knew the name. They had been saying it to each other since the morning it happened. Be water, 300 pounds of force, 143 pounds of direction. The force went where the direction sent it. This is not magic. This is not the invention of cinema. This is physics. The same physics that governed every body in that training ground, available to anyone who understood the principle and had the skill to apply it. Bruce Lee understood it. He had spent 20 years understanding it. He turned down $80,000 because the principle was worth more. That is all you need to know about what he valued and what he was. Empty your mind. Be water. Let the force come and send it somewhere it did not choose to go. That is what 300 pounds of Special Forces training learned on a Saturday morning in North Carolina. From a man who weighed 143 pounds and who was already gone before anyone thought to ask for his address.